Thank you all for having me here. I have to say, it's really an honor. The producer of Washington Week, a fellow by the name of Chris Carino, is an OU alum who, if possible, is more excited about my presence here tonight than anyone. And the one thing he told me to be sure to do when I arrived here was to say, "Go Bobcats." Last 2 words he said to me when I left the studio Friday night, so I've now done my job. But also thank you, Pat and Smitty, for sponsoring this. It's really an honor to be here and kind of exciting to be out of Washington, frankly, and to get away. But, you know, I thought to myself that, you know, really? The Carmen Ando Award? I did some research and I found out who else had gotten this award, and I thought, how could I possibly deserve this? And then I did a little research and I realized that I do deserve this. It turns out that Carmen Ando and I had a lot in common. He worked for an afternoon newspaper, which eventually folded, and so did I. He got one of his early big breaks working for the Baltimore Sun, as did I. He made his mark working for the New York Times, as did I. And his big career breakthrough came when he covered a big, messy story that featured epic miscalculation, tragedy, and disaster. He covered the Titanic sinking. I covered the 2012 presidential election. So there's that. I told him I would come here tonight and address this topic, why journalism is not dead. Now, this was something of a thought experiment for me, for I knew that if I could force myself to answer that question for you, that maybe I could persuade myself. Not to worry, I do believe in the premise of our talk tonight, and I'm anxious to take your questions when I am through so you can challenge my conclusions. It's just that I find it restorative from time to time to hold myself accountable for the things that I say I believe. I do spend a lot of time on college campuses like this these days. I imagine that I'm doing my small part to save journalism for the next generation. So I tell students that Wikipedia is a good place to begin, but not a good place to end. I tell them that Jon Stewart is a fine topical comedian, but they have to understand what the story is, and before they can finally laugh at the joke. You can't really laugh at a joke about Nancy Pelosi if you don't know who she is. I tell them they can watch Jon Stewart. I certainly do. I find him very amusing when I can stay up that late. And the only thing that they have to understand is that in order to do his job, Jon Stewart watches me. I tell them journalism is not dead, which is, of course, where we all fear we're headed. And it's easy to understand the fear. We yell too much, we listen too little, we dismiss fact in favor of opinion, we listen only to the people or the information sources which we have decided we already agree with in advance, especially, I have to admit, on television. I have a friend and colleague at the Baltimore Evening Sun when I worked there who used to describe it as being a mile wide and an inch deep. And it's true that television news is not always what it could be, but I would argue that it is still essential and it's still important. It's still where a lot of people get their information. Now, there's no question that the challenges for all of journalism, and certainly for television journalism, they're different than they were in the times of Carmen Ando. We have access to so much more information, and so little of it is news. I've been fortunate to work for and with some of the best people in journalism, including many of the recipients of this prize. But my curiosity truly started long before I stepped foot in a newsroom. As you heard from Andy, I inherited an abiding interest in the world around me from my parents. In the way of so many people who immigrate to this country, they chose to be Americans and were passionately curious about the world as it unfolded around them. So we grew up reading the newspaper every day, which sounds quaint now, but at the time it was really the thing to do, and I'm not really that old, so it wasn't that long ago. But we grew up watching Huntley Brinkley and Walter Cronkite, and they talked about consequential things, assassinations and sit-ins. Maybe I am that old, actually, as I think about it. But my parents took care to expose us every day, not just to the information, but to the connection between what was happening all around us in the world and what that had to do with our lives. So journalism for me was the perfect coming together of all of that. After 20 years in working this craft at 4 newspapers and network television, I landed at PBS 13 years ago, and boy am I lucky. Not only do I get to indulge what some would describe as kind of a junkie-like addiction to politics and foreign policy and culture and science on a near daily basis, but I also get to ask the questions I like and do it in a way that takes me, and hopefully in the end you, beyond the soundbite. On both Washington Week and the PBS NewsHour, we approach the news with a fairly simple premise. We assume that you can decide what you think if we give you the information to work with. Unlike our cousins in cable TV, we hope you never actually know what we think, or that we ever reach any personal conclusions at all. We believe that folks are still hungry to know that the rigors of daily life have not yet managed to entirely obliterate our need for information that happens beyond our neighborhoods, beyond our borders, beyond the ends of our noses. And that once that information is provided, accurately and even-handedly, you can then make up your own minds about what you want to think without any further interference from us.